Hello everyone, welcome to Facebook Live with the Horticulturists. We are the Horticulturists here to answer your gardening questions and just talk about what's going on out in the garden this time of year. My name is Candice Hart. I'm the Illinois State Master Gardener Specialist based here in central Illinois, and I love to grow flowers. That's kind of my gardening thing, annuals, perennials, anything flowering, that's my go-to. My colleagues here, do you want to introduce yourselves? Tell us what you like to garden with.
Yeah, my name is Kelly Alsop, and I am a horticulture educator based out of Bloomington, but I serve Livingston and Woodford counties also. My expertise lies with insects, pollinators, then I also love to dabble in vegetable gardening like Ryan does.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
And I'm Ryan Pankow, horticulture educator out of Champaign. My specialty is probably woody plants, trees and shrubs and all those kind of things. But like Kelly, I also like to grow some vegetables. I also really like just all the native plants. That's kind of my favorite niche.
Cool. So. Very cool. So as this is our last show of the year, we're going to try putting up a poll today, and I'll mention this a couple times, to try to get some of your guys' feedback on what you want us to talk about, because we love doing this. We love answering your questions, but we also want to do stuff that you guys want to see or you guys want to hear about. So keep an eye out. We're going to post a poll today, and we love your feedback on those topics. But we've got a couple demos planned today. If you have gardening questions, start to add those into the comment box. But I think Kelly's going to kick us off with talking about some evergreen containers, things you can do this time of year.
Yeah, so if you're like me, your outdoor pots have all died back and you have some pretty brown and black looking annuals. Yep. So what I do normally is pull those out, use that soil, and then I'll put a little sand on top. I'm not putting sand on this just because I didn't have any on hand, but the sand actually helps keep the water, because even though you're having evergreens outside and it's cold, they still want to have a little bit of water and they're still living. So I just wanted to show you just really simple design. So I went to a local garden center and I just picked up some stems of different evergreens. So I started with some Fraser fir, which is a little bit cheaper option, and I'm going to, populate most of the green arrangement with those. I picked up some junipers with the blueberries and some Oxford cedar. Now, what is going to make this, it's a simple design. What's going to make it special is the mix of the three greens. It's going to make it look really high end. See, Candice agrees.
I like that.
She's the expert.
High-end
so
greens.
I am the one that I will confer with Candice this whole time. Floral design can be somewhat intimidating to people, but here I'm going to show you just a few steps. I am not an expert floral designer or even the best floral designer, but following a few steps.
You're good.
So Candice is going to cut me off a little piece of wire.
Oh, yep. I sure am.
And what I'm going to do is I am going to place my first pieces, and my first pieces first. These pieces are going to determine the height of my arrangement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place two rather tall pieces back to back in my arrangement. So, but what are they doing? They're kind of like goal posting it, which is where a little piece of wire comes in.
How much you need?
So I'm going to take a little piece of green wire. This is just a floral wire that Candice gets at
craft stores sell it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, in the floral section.
So I'm going to tie these together. And this is the most complicated part of the whole arrangement. There we go.
Well, that's not too complicated.
There we go.
Easy peasy.
So I had nowhere on my height. I'm not going to go above this. Another thing that I do is I'm going to pick up this, and Candice is going to show my little trusty cardboard
circle
cut out, because what this does is it enables me to go like this and turn it, because it's going to be an all-around arrangement. So now I'm going to start to build the shape. So I'm just going to grab some of these pieces right here, and I'm going to build my shape. So even though I might have pieces that aren't the prettiest, they're going to ultimately look good when they're all mixed in. So notice I put there's a piece right there. So there you go. I'm already starting to build my shape. I'm going to turn, and I'm going to put another piece right there. Again, building my shape. Turn.
And that soil's making those stems stay where you put them.
So that's just potting soil.
It
essentially,
is.
Yep.
But sometimes I put the, like right here, I'm going to put one piece right here, like right up against it. Oh, it's already filling out. You see that? I'm going to keep turning and keep filling it out. I'm going to use as many. Even if I have a little cut end, I'm still going to use it because ultimately those cut ends are going to be cut off, are going to be covered up by other stuff. So if I have a lower piece, I'm going to maybe put it more towards the edge. If I have a longer piece, now I've already pre-cut these pieces, so just to make it a little easier for demonstration. So while I finish filling in this, Ryan is going to give you a few tips on how to grow some of this and harvest some of this in your own landscape.
Yeah, I get that question a lot from folks this time of year. You know, how much can I prune off my evergreen shrub to use for wreath cuttings? And the answer is not that different than what we would normally prune in a given pruning session. And you can prune about a third of that foliage safely on a healthy plant without impacting plant health. But there is a little bit of a trick to it. You can't just prune the whole side of a plant off or it's going to look unbalanced. So just like a normal pruning operation, you would want to kind of spread those cuts out over the plant. So it's going to take a few minutes longer than just whacking off a few limbs. But you can safely prune about a third. One of the plants in my yard that I regularly use for this is arborvitae. We have some small arborvitae shrubs that last couple of years I've got quite a bit out of for wreath cutting. You know, another one that's great in our area is white pine. It's got a little bit longer, more feathery of a needle, where arborvitae is going to look very similar to the junipers there. You know, a flattened spray of a needle as opposed to then spruce and fir have shorter needles like this. So by varying some of those, you know, different needle characteristics, you can add some interest as well. You know, blue spruce is a commonly grown evergreen, and concolor fir is kind of a similar evergreen that's maybe does a little better in our area. So that's kind of a variety of some of the main ones.
Did you say yew?
I didn't mention yew. Yeah,
I tend to use a lot of yew. Because I have it. It's in my landscaping.
It's there.
But it's really the only time of year that I prune my yew, because I might as well use it. If I'm going to prune it, I might as well put it to good use. So I tend to use the yew as like the base for all my window boxes, containers.
Yeah,
and it's free because I have the plants already.
And actually, it looks pretty similar to the foliage.
Yeah, it's a nice dark green.
Yeah.
So if you have it in your landscape.
And I think everybody can probably find a yew. So
yeah.
So maybe save your winter pruning for your time. You're pruning for winter. It's better for plant health. And then any of this greenery you could use for making a wreath or making an arrangement like Kelly's doing here. Yeah. So
absolutely.
This piece doesn't work for me. So that's the technique. When a piece doesn't go the right direction, you just throw it behind you.
You don't have to use it all.
Well, now this is really filling in.
It is really filling in. It's starting to really show that, you know, if I just fill out my shape first, then and what did I do? All I did was I did my top piece. I said I'm going to go like that, and I just started turning. And if the foliage doesn't face the right way, you just keep turning it.
Until it faces the right way.
Until it faces the right way. Or you throw it over Ryan's head, and you say, this piece is not going to be used.
Get out.
Now, one question I've got is, what can I do for maybe a more sustainable Christmas tree option? And one of the things that my family's done is we use an indoor houseplant, Norfolk Island pine, as our Christmas tree every year. And so we kind of set it up high, a little higher than the pot would just sit on the floor.
Yeah.
And we're able to hang ornaments then off the edge of the pot that I think one of these arrangements would work wonderfully as a small Christmas tree.
Yeah, absolutely.
My Christmas tree this year is going to be branches tied together in the shape of a Christmas tree with ribbon.
That works too.
Because I can't have a Christmas tree because I have an 11-month-old. So it's going to have to be up high.
Put it out of reach.
So now I'm going to add the cedar, and this is when it really starts to look good. So I'm just going to continue turning and try to add it, at intervals every now and then. So the first piece is always going to go up high to make sure that I have it throughout the whole entire arrangement kind of organized. Some of these, I'm going to tuck them in, and as I go, I'm going to start adding to the sides.
So kind of organized, but kind of random too, but evenly spaced, I guess would maybe be.
I think the evenly spaced, if you have all cedar on this side and it's not throughout this side, then it's not going to look quite as high end. So I'm going to add another, just general kink right there. So it just lends itself well to going over the side of the pot. Even though I cut the tip out of this, I'm still going to use it. I'm just going to bury it in the base.
Yeah. So making use of that ugly piece.
Hide the cut ends.
Floral designers, they try to use everything. So I'm going to go, that's a little piece. I'm going to make sure he goes at the base. Just randomly throughout. Here we go. Do we see any major holes?
It's looking pretty good.
Okay.
Pretty good from over here.
So I've definitely left one of the juniper for the last because it really fills in my holes. I mean, you see how beautiful the blue juniper berries in, and then
pretty.
you just mix it. Oh, perfect.
Oh yeah, that really looks
So I'm going to take one of my taller pieces and maybe fit it in up high. Fill in that piece. Fill in that hole a little bit, right? Well, fill it in. Gotta get it in the soil or it's not going to stay alive. It's just going to be...
Or it'll blow out.
Yes.
On a windy day.
So again, I put piece here. So now I'm going to maybe put a piece right here. And I'm going to still continuously turn. Maybe put a piece right here. Continuously turn. This one has a cut in. I'm not going to worry about that because you'll never see it once it's tucked in. Put another piece right here. I have a little bit of maybe a hole right here, so I think I'm going to tuck this one in right here, and that kind of just really help that out. Put a couple more pieces on the side.
Love those berries on there.
A couple more pieces on it, and they just look so beautiful just hanging off the edge. Okay, so now ultimately I'm going to turn it to see if I see any holes. I feel like this did not work out right there.
just not tall enough.
So I'm going to maybe see if I have another piece. Do I have another piece?
Getting pretty
So,
low over
okay,
here.
I don't have another piece. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to take this piece out, rearrange it to kind of fill in that hole a little bit. And I don't want to miss out on that beautiful blueberry, so maybe I'll just let it shine right here. Okay.
Love it.
I think I'm done.
Beautiful.
I mean, you could keep adding and adding and adding. So then I have some beautiful winterberry, which Ryan just schooled me on the scientific name of winterberry. Sometimes winterberry is difficult because
What is it, Ryan? What is it?
once it's harvested, what is it? What is the scientific name?
Ilex decidua.
Yeah.
Ilex decidua.
So deciduous holly, I guess is what I know it as.
Nice.
But
nice.
really great plant, native. Has all these awesome berries in the wintertime.
Mm-hmm.
And another really cool thing that you can grow in the landscape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And maybe with the idea that you could prune in the wintertime
Exactly.
for some
Use it for
cuttings.
this time of year.
I'm going to maybe clip that tip off to see if I see that tip. Sometimes.
There you go.
So if you
And the
have
nice
any-
thing about this is it doesn't have to be a proper pruning cut because they've
No.
already been pruned off.
Exactly.
So I'm just going to go ahead and add some of those red twigs into my arrangement.
Really adding some color with that. The contrasting red with the green foliage.
One thing that I can do is I don't really have to use all these chunky ends. If I don't want to, I could cut it in half. So I'm going to use this chunky end right here.
Get a little height
Except
in there.
I don't want it to look like a goalpost. One of my chunky ends is I could do something like this. And even though it's a cut end, I could cut off some of those lower branches, and then maybe it could be kind of tucked in to
Tuck down low.
Put those berries throughout the whole
yeah.
arrangement and not just have them.
Nice.
I'm actually going to cut this tip off.
If you have any questions about what Kelly's doing, add them to the comment box there.
Yes, Candice, even though I'm doing the demonstration, Candice is an expert
Hardly.
on this type of work. That one kind of didn't work out very well.
At the overwhelming evergreen smell we have.
Yeah, that's the best part.
Pretty great.
That's the best part. And then obviously the nice thing about that you're going to put this outdoors is that those cool temperatures are really going to help preserve everything. Because a lot of times when you bring something, if you brought something like this inside or Wreath, it won't stay fresh quite as long because you're going to have obviously much higher temperatures and it's going to dry out a lot faster. So this can last you all winter long. I leave most of my stuff in my containers and window boxes until spring when I'm ready to dump out the soil and start fresh.
So after you set this outside, then do you water it, or do you just allow rainfall?
I let rain do it most. I usually don't add too much
snow.
to my own. Yeah, and snow.
Snow is a great way to keep it
Yep.
going. Do we see any holes where more red berries need to go, Candice?
Got one sprig left.
Not on this side.
Were you going to use this
Nope.
this particular sample? I'll talk about this for a second. This is red twig dogwood. Another native shrub that has these beautiful red twigs. Obviously, is deciduous. Loses its leaves in the wintertime, but one that you do have to work a little bit to maintain the maximum red twig color. It's recommended that you keep younger stems in the shrub's canopy to keep more of this red color. The older stems start to get a little less red. So definitely one you would need to regularly kind of prune out the older ones. Unfortunately, they don't work as great for this.
Yeah.
You could probably use the tips of those that are a little more red, but
yeah.
So another one that you
That's
could
a good
actually
one.
add to your landscape.
Yeah. Megan asked, where do you get all the cuttings? She missed that part at the beginning. So, Kelly, do you want to share again where you
I
what you do?
purchased my greens from a local garden center, so they have all these separate stems that you can go and buy by the pound, and so I really, it was just like a couple of pounds each of the 3 different greens, and then I did a bunch of the winterberry just to add that red color. I'm not a big fan of adding like tons of stuff. Mm-hmm. I like to keep it simple and natural. Even sometimes I don't even love the bow, but Candice made a really beautiful bow. So even though I purchased, I do think that you can, like Ryan said, grow some of this stuff in the landscape and then harvest it. His rule was no more than a third. I mean, you don't want to look like you just went in there and chopped part of it out. So how do you trim back an evergreen without, do you go all the way back to the base?
Well, that's a good question. I know a lot of folks, like with you in particular, we talked about you before now, shear their evergreens. So that's not what I'm talking about necessarily as shearing. I'm talking about hand pruning, where you, I'm not going to actually cut anything on this, but where you would actually go back into the shrub and cut off a limb at a branch union. So it takes a little bit of practice to kind of evenly distribute that, but you would want to actually cut at one of the branch unions on this. So not just, this is maybe in the middle of the stem because it was taken as a cutting, but and if you find, if you're trying to prune this shrub and you have something that's really sticking out, you can kind of just trace this back into the center of the plant and cut at a branch union. The plant's going to seal over that wound then if you cut at a branch union as opposed to just cutting in the middle of the stem. It'll have a little more difficulty, healing over that wound. So that's kind of the gist of hand pruning. You try and evenly space that pruning out around the canopy of the shrub. Anytime I prune, if there's any disease, dying, dead stems, I go ahead and get those out back to the nearest branch union. But it does take a little bit of practice to kind of get that pruning evenly distributed and have it not show. After some practice, it really doesn't look pruned when you get done. You can tell that the
that's
plant
the goal.
has
You
changed.
should be able to really tell that you did much pruning. And I always tell people, keep in mind too, you never want to leave a bare stem. Like if you cut too far back and there's no green left on that particular portion, most of those evergreens are not going to leaf out again. So if you don't leave,
Very true.
if you don't leave any green growth, you can't have new growth coming. So.
Yeah, and there's some technicalities there, or just the fact that evergreens don't have a lot of adventitious buds or secondary buds that are in the bark and dormant and ready to sprout after you prune them. Arborvitaes may be an exception where it has a lot of those. Actually, yew has a lot of dormant buds that will. But some of the others like firs, pines, spruces, they don't have a lot of those secondary buds, so they're not going to. So if you prune a stem down too much, it's really not going to rebound from that.
Have a bare stem. Yeah.
So the last thing I'm going to do is add a bow. There's always wire left at the bow, so you could put it at the base. You could put it, off to the side. It doesn't really matter, whatever you want. But I always tend to leave, you have those leftover stems. What I always do is I wrap my wire around the stem, and then that makes sure that the bow won't fall out, and then I'll just go ahead and put it at the base,
Put it in
and it's right there. And so
Our mic's kind of blocking. There we go.
So just really simple. Mixing the greens makes it look really high end. Okay.
Yeah, great looking arrangement.
Great job.
If you have any questions, let me know. Sorry that was fast, but I'm going to go ahead and put it to the side and let Ryan put it on the ground to get it out of the way.
Sure.
Out of the way.
Okay.
Oh, it's heavy.
It is heavy.
Okay, so we didn't get that poll going today, but we have asked you in the comments if you have ideas. This is our last show of the year, so we're going to be planning for 2020. So if you have topics, ideas, things you want to hear about, things you want to see us demo, definitely add those into the comments today. We already got a suggestion about invasive species. We'll definitely talk about those for sure. So put those suggestions in the comments and any gardening questions you have going on. Now, obviously, we're not outside gardening a whole lot this time of year. I've been mostly doing evergreen things for holiday decor for the most part. But we do definitely have plants inside this time of year, right? So I know, Ryan, you brought along a beautiful looking plants today that you were going to talk about.
One of the most beautiful plants out of my collection right now. It's a Thanksgiving cactus. We just talked about this before the show. There's also Christmas cactus, which is a little less common. As I looked at all of the cacti I had, once I figured out how to identify the difference, it seemed like all that we have is Thanksgiving cactus.
Mm-hmm. And that's what most people have.
But I think we've talked about this in the show before, that it's photo period dependent on flowering. So as the days get shorter, that causes this plant to flower. This particular plant I actually had under a light on a timer. If not, I find that where they're located in my house, they don't ever really flower because we have lights on at night. There's just too much exposure to light, and it's not regular. I don't really ever they don't take direct sun, so I don't have these in direct sun anywhere. So where they are kind of off in a corner in places, gets enough indoor light that it tricks the plant into thinking it's not wintertime. So the solution I found is to put them under a light on a timer, or another way is to put them in a closet at night, or give them that dark period that's nice and long, and probably about 4 to 6 weeks before you want these to flower like this. I was trying to get this one really in full bloom for Thanksgiving. You can see I've missed a little bit. I have quite a few blooms left here that haven't opened up. So although it looked pretty at Thanksgiving, it wasn't kind of in the full bloom that I had hoped. But this also brings up the point that wintertime is also a difficult time for houseplants. Although the changes seem subtle in our house inside, there are changes to a lot of the indoor environment. And if you don't pay attention, I know I've lost a lot of houseplants over the wintertime. That seems like the time that I've lost the most. So one of the most important things is thinking about watering. And contrary to what most folks would think, overwatering is probably the thing that kills the most houseplants over the wintertime. And that's because these plants go into a bit of dormancy. They aren't growing as much. Light levels are lower, especially if they're exposed to a lot of natural light. And so they don't need quite as much water. So what should we do is just be a little more careful with watering. You know, I can stick my finger in the soil right here and I can feel this is nice and moist. This was just watered over the weekend. If it doesn't feel nice and moist, then it's probably time to water. Good rule of thumb is to try and let that soil really dry out all the way between waterings. With a lot of my plants, I can tell by the weight of the pot whether it needs water or not. So that's something to think about as you're going around, and you can really get a feel for each plant and how dry its pot will feel.
I always stick my finger in the bottom hole.
In the bottom hole, that's a great idea. So
and
all your pots should have a hole in the bottom.
Yep, that's
And
first
if-
thing.
Pretty wet down there.
If there's any moisture, I do not water that plant.
That's a great point. That's a great way.
Because you're right, the top could dry out
A little bit
before
more, yeah.
the bottom is.
Now I have some that you can't lift up, so
Sure.
you know obviously those you have to do. You have to do
Sure.
something else. But you'll probably be slowing down your watering over the wintertime. At least that's how my house usually works. Now, also thinking about water and moisture, humidity is quite a bit lower in your house in the wintertime. Most houseplants like about 40 to 50% humidity. Indoors at my house, it gets down below 20% sometimes because we have a wood stove that we heat with.
Sure.
I've got a little digital monitor that records temperature and humidity that I've placed in my house. I've placed at my office to compare different environments. Even at my office, just in a standard office building, it's between 20 and 30% humidity in the wintertime. So that's quite a bit lower. Certain plants, Christmas cactus, probably not going to be impacted too much by that. A lot of your succulents aren't going to matter. It's not going to matter too much. But things that have, thinner leaves and are more sensitive to moisture, that can impact them. What can you do? Probably the best thing you can do is either move that plant to a more humid environment. So like a more humid spot at my house is around our kitchen sink. We have a very sunny kitchen, so I can get them a little closer to the kitchen sink. They get a little better relative humidity. In a bathroom near a shower with a sunny window or with enough light, or close to a humidifier. And probably one of the last resort things I do is put them on a tray of water.
Yeah.
Now, you can't have the pot down in the water, so a lot of folks use rocks to kind of lift those pots up. But that water really does evaporate out of the tray. One thing I used to do in the past, and I've realized doesn't do much, is misting your plant. And unless you're going to do that 5 times a day, you're really not going to impact humidity. And I've tested it with my little meter at my office compared to one plant over here sitting over a tray of water and one here that I misted 2 or 3 times a day. The humidity throughout the day really did the slow release from that tray did more than my misting could do for that plant. So
Interesting.
And even though I do this because of the light, because you're like grouping all these plants in front of the sunniest window you have, grouping plants together really does help too. I mean, it's not as amazing as a humidifier, but grouping plants together is one of the things I do.
Yeah, that's a great point. That is a factor. When all those plants get together, they create their own little microenvironment of humidity. Some of that even coming from the soil and the pots and everything. So, that's a great solution, too, to kind of cluster them together. You mentioned light. Light is probably the biggest limiting resource to plant growth in the wintertime. Light levels can change in your windows, whether you realize it or not. The sun dips a little lower on the horizon, and perhaps something now is blocking some of the light coming in that window. On that same note, some of your diffuse light through a north or east window in the wintertime cannot be enough to keep those plants alive. I know I've lost a few houseplants over the wintertime, I think, because what was good diffuse light in the summertime from a north window is not in the wintertime.
Reiterate that for them. The best windows are...
Well, it depends on the plant, but the best windows for diffuse light are north and east. The best windows for a full sun kind of plant are your south and west windows. Now, I have a tricky west window on my house. It during the summertime, it's pretty diffuse light because it's shaded by a big Norway maple. Boo to Norway maple.
Invasive
but
species.
That tree's days are numbered. It has a really bad girdling root problem that's unfixable, so we're kind of just waiting till its health starts to decline. But anyway, this time of year, that goes from what was like a nice shady window during the summertime to all of a sudden full sun when that tree loses its leaves. So think about that your trees outside can impact that light. And that can be a change that a plant can't handle. I guess the biggest thing that you need to think about in all of this is that any changes to a houseplant's environment or for a plant need to be gradual. You can't have this really stark, sharp change. So one of those changes that happens this time of year that can really affect houseplants is just all the heat coming out of the vents now. So that's different from in the fall time when we didn't have really air conditioning or heat for a while there coming out that much, that now all of a sudden that furnace is blowing. It's humid, dry air, so you can dry out a plant over a vent that's starting to become more active as we heat in the wintertime. Also, some of your windows can have a draft that you may not notice. I think that's really fried some vegetation on the outside of some of my plants. So those kind of things are, really think about that temperature and where you're having a big swing day to night, because most houseplants really take a daytime temperature 65 to 75 degrees in the wintertime is what they prefer, because most of them are tropical.
Yeah.
But they really don't like much more than a 10-degree drop at night. If you're starting to swing further than that by a cold window at night, that can really have an effect on them. So just a lot of those are just a lot of the things that over the years I've kind of learned by trial by error from plants not making it or not looking good midwinter to pay attention to. So
Cool. Yeah. So if you, I guess in conclusion, I'm concluding that whole. If you your plant starts looking bad, think about the watering, the temperature, the humidity, and the light. And address those 4 things, and maybe your plant will start to look better. But sometimes in the winter, my plant can look like a dog all winter long, and I'll never get it to look good. But as soon as spring comes and I get it outside in the fresh air and get it perfect light and start watering it and give it a fertilizer treatment, it looks like the most beautiful plant in the world.
Yeah, there's a lot of mine that I just kind of let them go dormant for the winter, basically, and I expect they're gonna look crummy. And you're right. Once you get back out in the spring, they're great.
Just kind of limp through the winter.
Yeah, they just limp along. And because some of those I even just put in the garage under lights because I'm just like, you're gonna look bad here. Stay alive, keep it going.
Or you can be like me and host a plant propagation class for your master gardeners, and then get rid of 75% of your plants.
That's a good way to do
because
it.
Plants will be coming to your future soon, and you don't need all those.
Yeah. If only we all had a greenhouse. We could
I know.
That would be
we all need a greenhouse.
Perfect solution.
When Candice gets a greenhouse, Ryan and I will visit her every fall.
I got to cut down some maples before we can do that. And we do have Ryan has a great article on this topic that we've got posted in the comments, so make sure you check out that article if you want some more information. Carol commented she uses a water meter, or by sticking her finger in to determine if it needs watering. That's a great way to do it. And we've had some other comments and questions coming in here. So let's see what we have. A couple comments about things we should talk about next year. Keep those coming in if you have ideas. Janice said she wants some ideas next spring on how to control weeds and grass in the garden that don't involve too many chemicals. Weed control we can definitely talk about. For sure. And then a couple questions I think we can talk about now. Tracy asked, how about powdery mildew on 9-bark shrubs? She's done good sanitation, cleanup around the bushes, but every year in late summer they're covered in mildew. Powdery mildew on 9-bark.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot. I think, one just basic cultural practice for powdery mildew is just pruning to keep the canopy more open, more airflow. It's moisture and high humidity that kind of cause it. But that's the best, most practical solution short of spraying a fungicide that would be recommended for that. But that's how I've managed it on most of my plants is just keeping the canopy of that shrub a little more open. Maybe there's a tree that's shading it a bit that you could let a little more sunlight in that'll help to dry it out.
Yeah.
Did you guys have any other recommendations?
Insecticidal soap is labeled and has fungicidal properties, and if you were to maybe spray with some insecticidal soap, which is not a harsh chemical. It doesn't last a long time in the environment. It will get that powdery mildew in the very beginning, and then maybe it won't spread quite as fast. I mean, you're never going to cure a powdery mildew. It's always going to, if I sprayed that insecticidal soap on a powdery mildew leaf, it would turn brown. But I do think you hit one of the biggest preventive methods on the head when you said sanitation.
Yeah.
So that was my number one go-to for powdery mildew throughout my greenhouse and in my landscape.
Yeah.
So if you're going to spray the insecticidal soap, that's early in the season then, before you really have.
Well, when you first notice that you're getting some symptoms, it might kill it out before it starts to spread.
Mm-hmm.
And that'd be any fungicide too. You want to do it early in the season, right when you notice it, because once it's
gone,
once it's fall, it's too late.
Because Ryan will reiterate this: is diseases are not cured, but prevented. And I think a lot of people come to us all the time. Oh, my tree has this disease. What do I do? There's nothing you can do about it right now. You have to wait until next year, see if the temperatures and the environment are going to be conducive to that disease, and then you have to spray a preventative, which is why a lot of people do not control diseases in their trees, because it can be really quite intensive.
Difficult,
But I mean, great job on a preventative treatment of sanitation this year. That's probably the number one on this.
I mean, she needs to be teaching this show because she's got the.
Yeah, good job. And I'll tell you too, Ninebark is a great cut foliage. So if you need to do some pruning, you can use it in.
It handles pruning very well.
I love Ninebark. Yeah.
I personally, it's one of my favorite shrubs.
I love Ninebark, especially when it flowers. It's glorious. Follow-up question while we're talking about powdery mildew. Lauren asks, any bee balms resistant to powdery mildew?
There are, and I actually think I have an article on my blog where I talked about powdery mildew, and I talked about, can't remember the exact cultivars, but
I can't think of any.
I pointed out some cultivars of zinnias and bee balm that were resistant to powdery mildew. Not nothing is
ever entirely resistant,
but has shown to have more resistance to powdery mildew. I can't remember the names off my head, but I'm sure Erin will see that blog entry, or
we'll see if we can find that.
Yeah.
If not, we'll post it after the show.
I think I remember that when you talking about that.
I think we talked about it this summer, possibly. Cool. Suggestion for 2020, a pruning demo from Ryan. Yep, we've already been talking about that.
Why does it have to be Ryan? Can I help?
Well, I mean, all of us.
I'll prune and make an arrangement with it. There you go.
We'll prune. Candice will make an arrangement. Kelly will diagnose any insect potential problems.
Yeah.
There you go. That's perfect.
A comment from Mary. She said her juniper with blueberries she only uses outside. Just because of the odor that they can emit indoors. So you can definitely kind of be picky about which ones use indoors, outdoors. There's always pets to consider inside too.
Yes, and some people, if you've never worked with these before, some people can actually be allergic to them. So notice I did it without gloves. Not very many people do it without gloves. I'm just used to it, and I like using my hands, but
that smell
can cause a reaction.
Yeah,
I think we have somebody in my office that is allergic to juniper, and so she can't work with the juniper.
Sure, yes, different things. And I was going to mention this when I talked about wreaths. You always get sap on your hands too if you're not wearing the gloves. So if you do that, even just soap and water won't take care of it because it's just so sticky. So you want something that's alcohol based that'll get it off. So most of the time, whenever I do a wreath workshop, I bring along some hand sanitizer because the alcohol in there will just cut through the sap. So if you got messy hands, pull out the hand sanitizer.
As an arborist, we'd use rubbing alcohol.
I mean, that works.
That's probably pretty abrasive on your skin, though. True. But that's
Women
another thing if you have
and
to.
rubbing alcohol on their hands.
Hand sanitizer smells a little better. Okay, let me go back here. I think we had another question here from Laura. She said she planted and transplanted some native shrubs and grasses in October and November. She did wild plum, coralberry, various grasses. How much water do they need now in zone 5B? Should she be watering those? She planted them in October and November. What do you think?
I mean, you still want to water your landscape until the ground freezes. This is the same for trees. And maybe you want to do it once or twice a month. The ground is going to freeze really soon, probably. Yeah. But we've really had some great precipitation. So, I mean, you don't really have to water at this point. I doubt it's going to get drier. But if it was really droughty, you would want to water them once or twice.
You know, and I probably did a similar planting this fall of some native grasses, some native shrubs, a few trees in the corner of our front yard. I really haven't watered, in maybe a month or more. And what I've done a few times is kind of dug into the mulch and felt that root ball of maybe the smallest plant is what I've picked. Because that's probably going to dry out faster than a larger root ball, just to check the moisture. And that was maybe, again, like a month ago before we kind of got some of these fall rains. But I would say we're probably just about good for the year on watering. We should expect enough rainfall to kind of keep it along. But you'll know if it gets dry. And if you can just like you check the soil conditions on your houseplant, you can go just check the soil directly and see what you think.
Yeah, great question. Okay, keep those questions coming and comments on what you want to hear about next year. Michael said it's always in need of help with best composting, soil amending, and IPM practices. We've had a lot of composting questions here this year, so we definitely did discuss that maybe we need to do.
Maybe we need a composting expert come and invite them down because I would love to learn more about composting.
That would be fun, for sure. Cool. Yeah. We'll keep those coming in the comments. While we wait,
can I talk about? I just did a blog post on sustainable holiday trees because I do a sustainable Thanksgiving dinner every year, and then I thought I could take it a little further and talk about sustainable trees. So. One of the things that Ryan mentioned, the white pine, the spruces, these things, they're going to grow around our area. It's the crazy ones that are not going to be grown in the Midwest or even close to Illinois. I think loblolly pine was one of them that was just something that's not going to be grown. We're going to have to source from the West Coast. So buy the tree that you pick out can help make it a more sustainable thing.
So more sustainable because it's just shipped further, smaller carbon footprint with local.
Shipping. And most of the time, if you go to a tree farm, which is even more sustainable because you're supporting an Illinois industry, they're replacing these trees 3-to-1 when you cut them down, and those trees are growing between 5 and 15 years before they're ready to be harvested. So they are sequestering lots of carbon, which is great for the Illinois landscape. And so I love the idea of going to tree farms, supporting a local industry that's also helping us sequester carbon. Another thing that I talked about in this article was, buying a container tree, but, the ground hasn't frozen yet, but you need to make sure you dig that hole and put that soil in the garage before where you're going to plant it after Christmas.
That's a good point.
But it can be, even more sustainable because not only is it something that you can get from the local garden center, but it's something you can plant right away, and that's going to ultimately sequester that more carbon, which is what we're all looking for in trees. We want them to sequester lots of carbon. And then another thing is, what in this research for this article, it really surprised me, guys.
What?
Is that more and more people are not buying live Christmas trees, and they're opting for the artificial trees. And the industry just in my local Bloomington area has dropped drastically. I mean, they used to sell 7 to 10 times more trees than they do now. So think about this. Where is an artificial tree created? Is it created in the United States? No.
Probably not.
Is it created with chemicals and
Petroleum.
sources? Yeah, it's an artificial tree is not very sustainable. And then when you're done with that artificial tree, where does it go?
Landfill.
And how long does it stay in the landfill?
Forever.
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 So people think they're being more sustainable by going for an artificial tree, and when actuality, you're more sustainable by cutting down a tree and putting it in your house. So just food for thought.
But do what you prefer.
Get a live tree. So,
Okay, let's finish it off. We got a couple questions we can answer while we finish off the day. But I wanted to show till the end here how to do a wreath too.
Okay.
Because we've talked about evergreens all day today too. So we can do containers like Kelly showed earlier. You can do wreaths. You can do swags. You can do garlands. There's so much you can do with evergreens. But a wreath is a very simple thing you can do with evergreens. Either you get from the garden center like we talked about, or you get from your own landscape. All you need is some type of form to attach your evergreens to. So you can get simple rings like this from craft stores, or the wider kind of just basic green wreath rings. They can be square, they can be round, they can be any shape. You just need something that we're going to attach them to. And then you need wire. So like we mentioned earlier, this is just basic paddle wire you can get from the craft store. And I went ahead and tied it onto my frame to get it started, because when I make this wreath, it's going to be one continuous piece of wire. I'm not going to cut it until the end. So that's why you need the paddle, so that you can just wrap around that frame. So first step is to cut those evergreens. So kind of like Kelly did for her container. I've gone ahead and cut a couple different types of evergreens here just into smaller pieces. And the size of your pieces is going to dictate how wide or big your wreath is going to be. So if you want kind of a small, neat, and tidy wreath, then keep your pieces a little smaller. If you want something a little bit more big and organic, then go a little bit bigger. It just depends what you want to do.
but having like all of the pieces be the same sort of size really lends well to a pretty wreath.
Yeah. You want to keep it consistent. Whatever. So if you start small, stay small. If you go big, stay with larger pieces. So once you've got your pieces cut, what you're going to do is just make little bundles or little groupings of the type of evergreens that you want to use. And each of your bundles could be the exact same. So you could use a piece of the Fraser fir, a piece of the noble fir, a piece of the junipers, or you can alternate it. It just kind of depends on the look you're going for. So if I got a little group of fir here, a little bunch of juniper, and I'm going to lay that on top of my wreath frame here where I have that wire attached, and I'm just going to hold it down and use that paddle to wire around the cut ends nice and tightly.
That's the biggest mistake people make,
Nice
is
and
not tight.
So 2 to 3 times around, if you're doing it nice and tight, will be plenty. Give it a shake. If they fall off, you're not tight enough. You want to have a nice tight wrap around there. Okay? First step, make a bundle. Second step, make another bundle. So pick up the same, you can repeat the same exact thing, the same order. This time I'll add some cedar in to spice it up. Okay, so you can go with whatever kind of pattern you like, but all your cut ends are bundled in one spot. And then that second group is going to go on top of the first one, not directly on top. You're scooting it back a little bit so that it covers the cut ends of that first grouping. That's your whole goal with a wreath here, is that every time you're covering up the cut end, so that when you're done and you get all the way back around, you shouldn't see any cut ends of those evergreens.
So what I've seen people struggle with is at what angle do you attach the next piece to kind of keep moving in a circle?
So
that's a
that's a good question. So I tend to do most of fairly, I guess you would call that parallel to to the wreath frame.
Or just a little
bit angled outward.
'Cause I
Okay,
think
again,
a lot
it
of
depends
people-
how big you want your wreath to be. Because if you're going pretty angled out, you're going to have a pretty long wreath.
And I think that's what a lot of folks think, is that it needs to stick like out at a 90-degree angle from the circle, but that's makes it really hard to
If you've got the
attach.
right cut of pieces, like the right shape of pieces, then they'll lay in whichever direction you wire them on there. Okay, so I'm not going to go all the way around. I magically have one that's a little farther along from earlier. So that's what you would do, is you would continue doing those bundles all the way around until you get to the end. And the last one, you kind of have to tuck underneath and get your wire underneath there so you don't flatten your first grouping. And then at the end, you cut off your wire, tie it off, and that's it. So it's just a big ring of little bundles stacked on top of each other and wired on there.
And then you can just, use this wire to add on bows and pine cones. And
Yep, or you can hot glue, you can tuck things in like that. And then, of course, you can always finish it off with a bow at the top, the bottom, the side, wherever you're wanting to, or go without a bow, too. So
one of the things that is different from when I make mine, I use wire hangers. I shape them into a circle.
Yep, that's
and
a
I'll
good
put two of them
inexpensive-
together, and I'll wire them first with that paddle wire, and then that's what I use because
Yeah.
I never have the
Yes,
forms
if you
when I
don't
want
have,
them.
if you don't have a metal ring or something to use, then pull out those wire hangers from the dry cleaner and put it in.
Well, even the wire hangers are getting harder and harder to find.
That's true. Yeah, really. If you don't go to like the dry cleaners, then they're hard to.
In the
hard to
last
find.
couple of years, I've been adding pieces of ribbon to my bundles.
Oh, that's a good idea.
So the ribbon
Little
is all throughout. Now it's, not, pristine, but it just looks really cool.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, so pretty simple. If you have those evergreens at home and something to wire them to, give it a shot. Make
So
it your
any
own
follow-up care
wreath.
after that, or you just pretty much hang it up? And...
Yeah, hang it up. Now, obviously, like we talked about with the containers, if it's outside, it's going to last a lot longer because you have cooler temperatures. When you hang it inside, it's going to smell great. It's going to look great. But it will start to get dry and brittle after a couple weeks, and it might start to shed on you, especially if it's on a door where it's moving a lot. Again, misting's not going to, like we talked about, misting is not going to give you a whole lot.
Could you soak it in a kitchen
could,
sink
yeah,
for a little bit?
Yep, you could definitely soak it.
Like
Or the
submerge it.
bathtub, and give it some moisture.
And if
Yeah.
it's a pot, you could always add some water.
Exactly. Cool. So give that a shot. Let me see. We got a couple questions. I want to make sure we get to those in our last 8 minutes here. Dee asked a question: are the waterless Amaryllis bulbs saveable? And I think what you're talking about, Dee, I got a couple of these last year. It's an Amaryllis bulb. It's dipped in wax. Have you seen these?
Yes, I've
it's
seen
dipped
them.
in wax, so you don't actually plant the bulb. It already has the flower initiated. It's coated in like a red colored
I know what you're
wax.
talking about.
So waterless. I'm assuming that's what you mean. You don't actually water it. You enjoy it, let it bloom, enjoy the thing. I actually did peel off the wax last year and plant it, and it did grow. So yeah, you can. As long as the bulb is still like firm and healthy and it looks good by the time you're ready to do that, it worked for me. So try it out.
I know Ken Johnson, and I think I did too, did articles on amaryllises, how to take care of them.
Yep. Yeah, so we got lots of info on the website if you need that. Yeah. Okay. Lauren asked, she said, shoot, I already bought an artificial tree. What do I do with it if I want to switch back to a real tree? Donate it. Maybe there's some places that'll take donations, and then somebody else could
Or use it
maybe
for the
enjoy
next
it.
30 years of your life.
Yeah, just keep using it.
Thrift stores, secondhand stores.
Redo the lights. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, question here about sugar maple. They have a sugar maple about 40 years old that on one side, about 5 feet away from the tree, construction has dug up in order to put a sidewalk. Since then, there have been branches that have died randomly. I also have a Green Mountain sugar maple that was connected to the construction. It too has branches that are dying. The tree is about 20 years old. I'm in Illinois, Zone 5. I'm wondering if this is a norm for sugar maples. I'm wondering if I should hire a tree company to cut away the dead branches and if it's too late for these trees. So construction
Well,
damage.
maples have a pretty, relative to an oak tree, less of a root system. So, construction is really going to impact that root system. It really depends to how close it is to the tree, how much of the root system is impacted in total from that construction. But I don't think it necessarily would spell the end for your tree. I think it definitely needs some special care in the coming year. To answer your question on the dead limbs, yes, you absolutely should have those dead limbs pruned out of the tree. Probably should think about protecting the rest of the root system that's left as best you can. So as much as you can possibly stand to mulch out to the drip line of that tree, I would recommend. Keeping it watered next year during that dry time of the year. So, after we hit about June or so and rainfall starts to dry up for the summer, think about watering a little earlier. A lot of plants I don't think about till maybe July or when it really starts to get hot doing a lot of watering, but I think in this case and trying to nurse that tree along, I'd probably water it at any point I feel like it's dry in the summertime. That's really the best thing we can do. That the damage has been done to the root system, so there's not, shade trees really don't have high nutrient requirements, so it's really not a case where I would recommend a lot of fertilizer. You may get a soil test just to make sure pH isn't off a little. And over time that may change too as they install a sidewalk. There's a lot of calcareous materials that are in the concrete, in the gravel that's maybe underneath the concrete, so that can actually raise pH over time and treat shade trees like a lower pH, probably lower than 7. So it may be worth a soil test just to see if pH is a little off, because that can sometimes strike a balance for the tree. But that's really the best we can recommend, is just trying to minimize any further impact to the roots. So the mulch is going to preserve moisture. Watering is going to keep the moisture there that it needs. Maybe limit the activity under that tree from here on out, even if foot traffic from humans or animals or anything. So really just need to protect what's left of that root zone.
Yeah. And just a little bit behind the biology of trees is what happens is when you start killing off some of the root system is it kind of evens out throughout the tree. So then it starts taking some of the branches out. So it doesn't necessarily mean that those dead branches doesn't necessarily mean death to the tree. It just means it's kind of responding to those damaged
reducing its
roots.
leaf area because it doesn't have enough roots.
A tree's a system that has to be kind of in equilibrium, so it has to have enough roots to support the top growth, and that's why you see sometimes dead limbs pop up on a healthy tree. Well, it's usually an inner shade limb that just wasn't producing enough photosynthesis that it had the roots to support that limb, so it's dropped it off. I'd really probably recommend also in all of this to have a certified arborist take a look at your tree, because you can't beat a qualified arborist on the ground looking at that and really assessing its health. There may be some other treatments they can recommend. There's growth regulating hormones for trees that you can actually apply to the soil, the root system of the tree, and what it does is reduces it reduces shoot elongation on the tree. So that energy that the tree would have put into shoot elongation, it's going to focus on defense mechanisms and root growth and other things. But that's something that somebody with a pesticide license would have to apply for you. And it really is a carefully done treatment that there's a right time and a place for that. But I would really suggest having an arborist take a look at that tree on the ground. It's well worth your time and investment in that house call.
Can't hurt. Excellent questions today, everybody. Thank you so much for your awesome questions and comments about what we should talk about in 2020. If you still have ideas, feel free to add them into the comments even after we're done being live, because we're going to do a planning meeting to talk about next year, because this is our last show of the year. So we want to wish everybody happy holidays and a happy new year, and thank you guys for joining us. Is this our second year doing this? We started last year.
Not full year, but
year
and a half.
Yeah, so we're having fun. We're really enjoying it, and we want to thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you.